What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the microcast. So happy to be back. It's been
Back in the studio. It's been a minute.
3-4 week hiatus. Man, I needed that hiatus. Though.
Hell of a taper. Hell of a podcast taper.
It was good to take a couple weeks off, and we've got you
Are
back.
You feeling
too.
recovered? No more pod doms.
Pod doms.
It's a real thing, man. Pod doms.
Well, it was more of a lack of inspiration for what to talk about.
Yeah.
Is that doms?
Sure, everything can be doms if you try hard and believe in yourself.
And we've got you back. So
I'm back. Yeah, that's right. We're going to start out with some hot or not topics. Then we're diving back into our partner race swap. So this is where I've run Western States. You've run Leadville. This year, I'm running Leadville and you're running Western States. So we're talking about what we're doing to train and we're giving each other feedback as coaches and partners on the races that we've swapped. We're also going to talk a little bit about transitioning into spring and summer trail season. Right now, for a lot of athletes, we're coming out of winter and people are starting to rack up vert. They're starting to build volume. So we're just going to talk about some broad strokes training recommendations for how to go into summer healthy, fit, and well prepared for your upcoming race and adventure season. But before we dive into all of that, I want to start with some hot or not topics.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. All right, TJ. This one, I feel like there's a gender component to it. And the topic is 2-in-1 shorts. So these are the shorts that have like a tight short, like a fitted short built into a looser short. So it's shorts where you're wearing two shorts simultaneously, or like a short turducken. Like a crotch turducken.
Oh, okay.
Are you familiar?
I am familiar. I've had a few pairs of these shorts in the past, and I have always cut the liner out of them
so that you can be liberated within the short.
So I can wear the proper fitting underwear, I suppose, of my choice and material.
You don't like having underwear foisted upon you.
Well, I don't like having like underwear that goes down to your knees and you're short. Like, I think it's a terrible concept. I think this is one of the coldest things we've ever discussed.
Wow.
On here.
All right. Well, I'm going to zag. I actually kind of like 2-in-1 shorts.
No.
I feel like it is slightly different for ladies though. I only know from my limited experience of not, I know what I'm packing under my shorts, and I kind of like having the gentle compression and support of a shorty under the looser short. My absolute favorite pair of shorts is like a pair of North Face 2-in-1 flight shorts from like 3 years ago, because it has like the thin sort of compressive layer with some pockets built in, and I actually find they help prevent thigh chafe. So ladies, you feel me out there? You know that thigh rub during a 50 miler or 100 miler, not that fun. So I kind of like having a little bit of extra coverage. And then I like having the modesty of the outer layer. So I'm hot.
But I'm curious if in the women's shorts, they are like a length of inner liner that exceeds the length of the actual short.
No, and I think that is an important sort of like modifier, is that I need the inner short to be shorter than the outer short.
I mean, if you're, I doubt anyone from any brands are listening to this, but
I don't know. I feel like this is hugely influential. Congratulations to all of the running industry insiders who made it past the phrase crotch turducken and are still listening.
If you design shorts for men, do not design a men's short for running purposes that the inner liner is longer than the actual short. These things are so hot. Like if you've ever tried to wear these running in summer in Colorado, like you're immediately just going to cut the liner straight out of it because it's way too much material. It gets really hot. And you know what? Show a little quad out there. Yeah. Why not?
I love a little upper male quad myself. And I also, I agree. Like when you have like the super long lining that's like longer than the outer short, it starts to look like something like that your space cult is wearing before you commit suicide.
It's awful. It's just awful.
It's not a good look.
I dislike
Do you ever see, I feel like this is like, you always know who's like a real runner because real runner men are not afraid of wearing tights and showing some thigh. Do you ever see like the guy in winter wearing tights and then like basketball shorts over the tights?
Always. I
Not
love
a good
that.
look.
I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah. It's, again, too much material.
Too much redundant quad fabric.
And again, I just got to say, like, there's nothing wrong with that compression. I think that's great. But when it goes down to your knees and you're the kind of runner who's out there all day, it gets pretty hot.
Gets
you
hot
just
in there.
don't need extra material.
No.
Yeah.
All right. So
not hot.
A real mixed, well, hot for me. Mixed reviews on 2-in-1 shorts. All right. In a similar vein, TJ, how do you feel about cotton?
Ooh. It's tough because my favorite bucket hat is definitely pure cotton.
Right.
But at the same time, cotton is just not a great material to do athletics in.
Unless your goal is nipple removal. It's not a great sport material.
Nipple removal, just staying wet, very wet, and like loose.
Staying wet and not and not cool.
Right.
Because there's no wicking in the cotton.
I haven't seen anyone training in a cotton shirt lately.
Yeah. No, I feel like, I haven't seen that in a while. One of the reasons that like you always want to look for a wicking fabric, I actually really love a merino. The fibers of merino wool are like have a specific natural texture where they don't hold on to microbes as much. So like you'll notice that merino wool materials don't smell quite as bad. And it's not just for winter. Like Patagonia makes some really nice ultralight merino layers. Like that's usually what I tend to wear for when I do like a 100-mile or a 50-mile race, because it's quick drying and it just doesn't break down and it doesn't need to be washed quite as much. So I'm a big merino fan. But cotton's going to be a not hot from me.
Yeah, cotton is
I can't even wear cotton pajamas.
It's literally cold.
Yeah, like I need a performance wicking pajama because I'm a sweaty sleeper.
What about wearing your t-shirt, your race t-shirt on race day?
Yeah, I love this because it's like you go to packet pickup, you get your free shirt, you immediately put it on and race in it. To me, this has like the same vibe as like, did you like have the kids in college who got the t-shirt at freshman orientation and then wear it to the first day of school? It's kind of like that energy. Or like when I saw Coldplay in concert in like 2006, I got a t-shirt on like the Viva La Vida tour and then immediately wore it to the concert like an absolute champ. I do wonder, for people for whom that is their strategy, what was their backup? And like, what do you know about your nipples that you are fine at committing to an unknown shirt fabric? Like, I actually feel like it's kind of like a secret savage flex to wear your race t-shirt.
I don't know if you remember when we were in Argentina for the UTMB Valhalla race last May.
Europeans love to do this.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe how
everyone was wearing their race t-shirt.
Everybody.
They
all picked up their shirt like 12 hours before the race and decided to race in it.
Yeah. So, and I also feel like this is particularly tough for women. I feel like the folks who design the free t-shirts that they give out at races, no matter what the gender of the apparel is purported to be, it makes me suspicious that whoever designed the shirts has never actually seen a woman before, because the shape to me is not even reminiscent of the female anatomy. It's like very boxy, very short. And also like it's got like a flare at the hips that just makes me feel like I'm about to drop off oranges at my kid's soccer practice.
I tried on that shirt, and to be fair, it was not a cotton shirt. It was a tech t-shirt. I tried it on.
It's like the weird like grid tech fabric.
Yeah, I tried it on and the fit was not for me.
No.
There's no way I could race in that.
No.
Too tight.
Very tight.
Ugh. Awful. Yeah, terrible for, definitely bad for the nipples.
Like, the guy who came in like second was wearing his race t-shirt.
Yep.
Like, people standing on the podium straight up wearing the free t-shirt at this UTMB race.
I mean, it's kind of baller.
It is baller. It's totally baller. Yeah. It's a savage flex. I think it's like, it's a baller dark horse move. I'm really into it.
Well, I think what's interesting, it's kind of like the ultimate nerd move.
Yeah,
in my mind.
Correct.
It's like, I really love this race so much that I'm going to race in it, and then I'm probably going to wear the same shirt to breakfast.
It's kind of like whenever I see like an older gentleman on the trail wearing Brooks Ghosts from like 2002, I know he's about to absolutely steal my KOM. It's just a savage move from the back.
So although it's risky, I think it's hot.
Yeah, same. I agree.
How about doing push-ups on your knees?
Well, because this is the only way I know how to do push-ups, I'm going to say it's very hot. But I would also, like, I think a larger theme here that I want to pull on is that modifying exercises so that you can do them and they're attainable is always good, right? Like, you don't always need things to be the hardest ever to grow and progress, especially with strength. Sometimes doing what feels good and is attainable and makes sense to your life is the best way to incorporate strength training into your routine.
Yeah, meet yourself where you're at.
Do you do push-ups?
No, never.
I do push-ups. I do them on my knees. I do 20 as part of my strength training routine.
I do 0 upper body strength.
Wow. I've been working a little bit on upper body, not just because I want to race using poles occasionally, but I've been really working on my athletic chain and my back, less for running than just for like daily life, not slouching quite as much.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that doing just a little bit of push-up helps me build some of the posture mechanisms that I need to not just have a crazy backache all day at work.
Oh, that's good. I'm a big fan of the glute bridges for that, for myself.
Love a glute bridge.
Okay. Barkley Marathons.
Oof.
Hot or not?
You know, man, I have a really conflicting opinion on this. You know, I personally, this is just like my thing, is I struggle to connect with a race that has like a secret entry system. I understand the romance of it all, right? Like you have this like legendary and charismatic RD Laz who does have like a conflicted reputation in the space. He's not someone I necessarily look up to or connect with in a meaningful way, but he's also not someone that I think we need to write out of trail running culture by any means. I personally have a hard time getting super, super stoked about Barkley because it's a lot more like orienteering than true ultra running. And because it is such a closed system, like you have to know a guy to know a guy to know a guy to get into the race. And it's super secretive and it's all about who you know, which just doesn't motivate me or speak to me in a way that makes me want to just like, you know, follow it on Twitter. I did really enjoy watching Jasmine Paris become the first woman ever to finish Barkley. Mm-hmm. But again, I think that it shows like for so long, this event wasn't one that historically has lifted up and included women and folks of other marginalized backgrounds in a way that motivates, inspires, and speaks to me. So it's just kind of like, you know, I think it's interesting. I think it's cool. I think the Netflix documentary is worth watching. But it doesn't feel like it's very much in conversation with what motivates me about the sport. You know, Does that make sense?
So you're cold on it.
I'm Luke cold.
You have to have a take for hot or not.
My take is that Barkley Marathon is perfectly crafted to produce some of the worst, most bullshit, oversimplified takes in the sport. And I am going to stand my ground on having a nuanced take that says that this is kind of a weird event. And I have profoundly mixed feelings about it. I would love to see an event that made a practice of supporting more than one woman a year. You know, I think the fact that it has taken this long for a woman to succeed doesn't just speak to the resilience of women. It does speak to the old boys club that is the Barkley Marathons. And that just doesn't it's a private event and you're allowed to do what you want with it. But I want to spend my time and my valuable attention giving my attention to things that speak to me, speak to my values, motivate me. And watching 20 people hike around the woods in Tennessee just like doesn't motivate me. And I think it's fine if other people feel differently. I think that it's really cool that other people get into it. But it doesn't make me like very excited to wake up and watch trail running.
I think that point about the old boys club of ultra running is the reason why I spend literally no time, no moments throughout my day or week or month or year thinking about this race whatsoever, ever.
Yeah.
And
I think it has I think it takes up more space and energy than it deserves, is how I feel.
Well, I think you see it now as we have this, it's becoming more elevated in the culture of the sport right now, as you have this kind of old boys club versus, you know, the actual progression and evolution of the sport. You saw this a lot when UTMB was under fire for getting that race out in Whistler.
Yeah.
Where you had a lot of people who were embedded in the community long term, pushing back against, progress in the sport. And, people kind of
a version of progress, to be fair.
Well, I think honestly, if we're going to progress in this sport, we need to probably move in the direction of UTMB. Like, sure, small mom and pop races and local races are great, but that's not where the money is. That's not where we're going to be able to do live feeds. It's not where we're going to be able to commercialize.
Build a professional career that supports the well-being of athletes full time.
100%. And so, like, Barkley again is one of those races that's really not set up. It's kind of standing in contrast to the direction that things are going. And although, like, the reason, that's one of the reasons this is like, that's kind of like an event of the past. Yeah, like, I think it's great when people do well there, and like, I admire that. No, it's not a race for me. If I was to have an athlete who wanted to do it, I would be full on in support of them and learning all the nuances of the race to help them, have the most success they could. But again, it's one of these small niche races for the select few, and it's just not on my radar because, the average runner out there isn't doing this race.
Yeah.
So, I'm not spending any of my valuable mental and emotional time thinking about this.
Totally. Yeah.
So I'm cold on Barkley.
That's your take?
Yeah.
Final take?
Yeah, I'm cold on it.
Yeah.
If you're an athlete out there who's in Barkley and you want to coach, I will support you 100%. We can together become hot on this.
Yeah.
But until that moment happens, no, I'm cold on it. I'm not going to spend much time thinking about it.
Yeah, I feel that. Well, now it's time for some partner race swap training updates. So I wanted to share how our training is going for our various races, and we would just give each other real, honest coaching feedback in the moment. So TJ, right, this week is a big week for you because you are about to race the Lake Sonoma 50 while getting ready for Western States. I want to know why you chose the Lake Sonoma 50, and I want to know what your approach is for racing a 50 on your way to a 100-mile race.
It's a good question.
You've thought about it, right?
I have.
Please tell me you have.
I have a why.
Okay, great, good.
No, woo! But I this is actually a race that I've always wanted to do, but never really was able to do because I typically ski a lot more in winter, and so preparation for a 50-mile race in April, it's kind of tough where we live. Like, we don't really have much trail access at all right now. We probably have a few miles of trail. And so training for something like this is like pretty tough. But because of, where Western States is kind of positioned in the calendar for the year, it really makes sense. We're about 3 months out from the race already. Yeah. So it makes sense to and for me especially, I tend to take a little longer to recover from like 50 plus mile distance races. So it makes sense for me to do a race like this a bit farther out than maybe some other elite athletes would be racing before Western. But I kind of like the layout of this race.
Yeah. So I want to hear a little bit more about that. I want to know how you think about it, both as a coach and an athlete, when you're picking, like when you're running a shorter ultra. It's crazy to call something 50 miles shorter. Giant grain of margarita salt there. When you're using one ultra to prepare for another ultra, how do you think about that timing when it comes to yourself? And what advice do you give athletes who want to do something like a 50K, 50 miler, or even a 100K in preparing for a longer race?
Well, it depends on what kind of history I have working with the athlete.
It's individualized.
Yeah, it's very individualized. But for an athlete that I'm newer working with, I'm going to give a lot more, a bigger window for recovery after that ultra, before like the A race ultra. For an athlete that I've worked with for longer and I know how they're going to respond to the stress of that event, we can push it up closer. And so for me, the reasoning having like a race like this, one, it's a race I've always wanted to do, and there was a couple other races I was considering, but like having this be about 3 months away, I know for me it takes me like 3 weeks to really feel like I'm back online after a hard effort. And so I wanted to make sure like I gave myself that grace and didn't have to rush anything, because I've also been kind of working through a little bit of persistent like lower leg issues still since Leadville that are finally resolving. And
Yay.
so like I don't want to put myself in a position where like, okay, that could flare up and then like
and then
really,
you wouldn't have time to address it.
Right, exactly. And so like where the race falls is really individual and based on your history. If you're a newer athlete and you're using a like an ultra to kind of like stepping stone off of to another ultra, like for example 50 to 100, it's a pretty logical progression.
Yeah.
I would err on the side of caution and probably be in that 10 to 12 week window before the actual A race. Now the other thing that's really interesting is I am not really tapering for these
right
races.
Okay, so how do you, again, like I think it's always interesting, like I want to talk about your training specifically, and then I want to see how we can extrapolate this for, you know, athletes and listeners. You're not tapering for Lake Sonoma, so what does that look like for you? How do you feel, and how are you adjusting your strategy for the race, knowing that you aren't going to be 100% fresh and tapered?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is not something that I've done in the past. In the past, I've pretty much tapered for every race that I've done, I think.
Yeah.
The Run Through Time Marathon was again another race that I did earlier
Right.
this season, and it's really hard to call it a race when you are coming in like and you're using it as a long training run. It is a race. I am trying to be competitive and stay on my growth edge, but there's also kind of the knowing that like my legs are not fresh.
Right.
And so, you know, that's kind of mentally challenging.
Yeah. How do you, so, you know, here we're talking about the difference between a focused effort. That's what I call it with my athletes, like a focused effort. When you're doing a race, but you're not full sending it, like we're not tapering, we're not doing like the full shebang for it. And the goal is to use that race as a stepping stone in training. How do you adjust both your training, and how do you adjust your mental approach and strategy for races where the goal isn't to like go out and win that race, it's to do that race in order to get prepared for something further down the road?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think like at least for me right now, it's like for Sonoma, um it's really about like managing expectations. And then you know, having like the lead up to this is kind of like a hard effort followed by like a very short, very easy effort.
Right.
So it's not like I'm not going to be going into this as taxed as I was going in through Run Through Time, because like this is a 50 miler. Like you do have to respect the stress.
Like you don't want to go, I mean, no matter how advanced an athlete you are, it's not recommended to go for an ultra on tired legs.
Right, exactly. And so like I'm doing a workout tomorrow, and then again like still a fairly long aerobic day of 8 miles the day after, but then I'll take a full rest as I travel out to the race. It's going to be all day travel on Thursday to get from where we are to get all the way there in California. And then again, kind of a longer, a bit of a longer, like I think another 8 mile run on Friday as a shakeout, which is
that's
just
an epic freaking shakeout.
A bit longer than normal.
God.
Yeah, and then you know do the race, and then of course like I'm going to take a lot of rest after the race. I'm going to probably take 4 days.
And so
off.
You know, we really, as coaches, we really like athletes to do these focused long runs, because there's a lot of things that you can only do in races and race simulations that you can't get in training. So doing things like race day fueling, practicing with your gear, practicing your strategy, practicing getting in and out of aid stations efficiently. What are your goals and intentions for Lake Sonoma, with the longer term expectation being that you're using this as a learning experience and as a stepping stone to get to Western states?
I think it's a good question. You know, practicing some like real food fueling.
Pop-Tart Palooza.
Yep, that like I've been practicing. You guys have heard about it already. I put in a lot of work on the treadmill.
Are you pivoting to the Pop-Tart minis? Is the big question.
I think I'm going to pivot to the minis because they come in those little packages. It's all right there.
Yeah.
And it's like less. I was having issues transitioning from the treadmill to the trails with the Pop-Tarts. They were flying out of my vest and exploding. So it really was kind of hard to eat those and run. So I'm going to try the minis at the race. I'm probably going to pack I'm going to carry a little extra fuel in case those things start to explode too. But I'm going with the minis. So new fueling strategy will be a big focus. Also, staying on my growth edge is a big focus that I'm carrying over from last summer, which is like leaning into the discomfort the entire time and knowing like that discomfort is likely going to come on a little sooner in the race because my legs aren't going to be, they're just not going to be fully recovered.
Right.
I should be feeling pretty good by Saturday, but you know, I did 2 workouts and a long run last week, and you know, that was a 10-hour plus training week, so that's a lot for me. It's not like a down week at all. Even though thanks coach, I did just 6 miles on Sunday, which was nice after the long run.
Nice. What advice do you give athletes who are doing focused long run, like who are racing as a way of doing a focused long run, building up for an effort? Like, how do you have them shift their strategy? How do you have them set their goals? And what specific skills do you push your athletes to practice in these circumstances?
Again, come in with some specific goals. Like for me, a performance, an outcome goal would be, I want a PR on my 50.
Ooh, spicy.
It is spicy, but I think to be fair, I haven't done like a 50 with this kind of vert. Well, I guess I did last year at Valhall. Very similar race to the UTMB race. I think I did. But terrain wise,
terrain was messed up.
I think terrain wise, Lake Sonoma is going to be much more forgiving.
Definitely.
So
there won't be a ridge scramble during Lake Sonoma.
Right. And I think
there will be trail the whole time.
Exactly. So
that race in Argentina, sorry, I'm still not like over it because we did a trail race.
That race
and there was some parts that were lacking trail.
I know, and I totally thought that I was going to set my 50-mile PR.
I was like, here it is. I'm going to go do a 7-hour 50.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, I did not do that.
Well, I think that I still have a pretty good shot of running faster than, I don't know, 8:40 or something.
Yeah.
It's like my PR is not that strong right now at the mountain.
Well, you've done a lot of yeah.
So I think I've got a pretty good chance because this is on faster trails. And I want to keep that goal in mind because like it'll help me stay on my growth edge. But then what I think is really important beyond having some specific outcome goal that you're going for, always know what you're going for, even if it's a focused long run.
What does that mean?
Like, know what you're going for. Know what game you're playing.
Write it down? Like, what do you?
Sure, write it down. Talk to your coach about it. Know what you're going for. Know what outcome you're playing for. Gotcha. I am playing for a PR at this race.
Gotcha.
I'm not necessarily. It's a really competitive race, so you know, top 10 would probably be great. Maybe top 5 if I'm having a good day.
What are your process goals?
Well, I don't really think of it in terms too much of process goals anymore. I kind of think that there's this middle ground that I like to work with athletes on. I do this myself, which is to set performance standards for a race. So I think a lot more about like, what's the attitude I want to have? How do I want to show up specifically when there's adversity, when it starts to feel hard? What are the specific beliefs, mantras, affirmations, kind of all synonyms of each other that I'm going to bring up in those moments? And what is my effort level going to be, no matter how I feel, or if I'm slowing down, or if I'm crushing it, kind of what my intensity is going to be out there. So I always stick to those things because unlike the outcome, the PR, or finishing top 10 or whatever, like you can control how you show up. Nice. 100% of the time. So that's what you want to focus on. And that's something that's been very predominant in my own racing since last summer. It's something that I really want to solidify and get clear on, again, going into Western states where I think like there's going to be plenty of moments for adversity. So like, let's get clear now and work on that now. So that way it's very automated when I get to the big show. And then of course the process stuff, but at this point, the process oriented goals, you know, they're kind of at the bottom of my goals pyramid. It's the same stuff, you know, like eat every 30 minutes and thank volunteers and like, you know, run technical terrain, feeling smooth and, you know, hike with purpose, you know, like any of those things. I've kind of had those along the way for many years. They don't really change. They're the small stuff that kind of leads you to the outcome, but your attitude, your beliefs out there, your effort and your intensity, you're in charge of that. So that's something that I've been working on more in the last year that I think has been helping me have success. I think it's super important when you're not going into these like 100% fresh,
right?
because the adversity could come quicker. So it puts you in a position to have to work on these things more and more.
Totally. So how do you think about recovery? Again, like a 50-mile effort that's substantial, kind of no matter who you are, what your background experience is. How do you think about recovering after a focused run like this and building towards Western States after?
For me, it really starts first with the mental side of things, really like shutting it down on Sunday, not working, not answering texts, not answering emails. Just like it takes so much focus to run one of these races, that like I really, for me, need to respect that. Like I often feel like pretty frayed mentally for a while after ultras before, even like longer than like physically I'll come back pretty quick, but mentally I'll just be like, ooh, I don't know if I want to be out here. So like I just make sure that I take that mental space for myself, maybe like, checking in athlete logs from the couch a little bit more with like, this the compression pants on, just like getting off my feet, trying like to really prioritize above everything else in my life, like that mental recovery.
So what do you do physically though to make sure that you're recovering well?
Nothing. I just rest.
But like I mean, how are you eating? How are you pivoting to focus on sleep? Like how do you help athletes make sure that they get the most from the effort they're putting forth in a focused effort?
I mean, I think just to emphasize, like, don't get back at it too quickly, really like spend your time on the couch, don't use your standing desk for a couple of days, like get off your feet, maybe walk like around the block with the dog or something if you feel antsy, but really just like commit to that physical rest. I take just the same amount of rest days as I would if I had like really like raced this fresh. That way I can get back into the training like relatively quickly, but from like a place of 100%. I think it's a big mistake, and a mistake that I've made, like rushing back a little bit.
Yeah.
Like my coach tends to, I think, put training on the schedule a little too quick. So for me, a big thing is just to like make sure to respect how I feel,
right,
and like not use what's on the plan. The plan is always like an idealized version of how things go, but to like really respect how you actually feel.
Totally. And I think like from my perspective as a coach, when I have an athlete doing a 50K or a 50 miler to get ready for a longer ultra, even though we might carry a bit more fatigue into that race or into that focused effort, I never want us to be carrying fatigue into the next little section of training, because it can be productive to race with a little bit of fatigue, right? Because then like if you're running, a 50K or 50 miler on maybe not the freshest legs and maybe not the freshest system, you can still get some positive adaptations from that. But if you go way too fast into the next training block, you're not going to be adapting, and it's your risk for injury, your risk for burnout, and your ability to adapt are just going to be seriously diminished.
Yeah, I agree. So your race, Leadville 100, your A race for this year, it's a couple months after mine.
Yeah. It's a ways off.
What are you doing to stay motivated right now? I mean, I feel like this is like the hardest time of the year. Winter is just so straightforward. You know what you're getting. Like it's gray skies and there's no trails and you're running on the road. But now it's like we have some days that are like 50, 60 degrees, and there's like a little bit of trail and dirt opening up, but then, every other few days it's snowing and raining and it's terrible. Like I feel like at least for me, this is the hardest time of year to be really training, because like the weather is so unclear. What are you doing to stay motivated?
Yeah, well, I think for me, the weather doesn't matter. Motivation doesn't matter. I'm going to get out and do my training regardless of if it's shitting snow or if I feel excited to train or not. And honestly, 99 times out of 100, I do feel excited to train. I will say, like, I've done a lot more workouts this winter on the treadmill and a lot more runs this winter on the treadmill, just because I last year ran in the snow a lot, and that didn't help my mental health, and it also was not super great for my ankles and some lower leg tendon issues I had. So I've just gotten a lot more comfortable using the treadmill like a tool in my training, and I think that's been really, really beneficial. I will say that a lot of times when I'm doing workouts or doing runs on the treadmill, I will visualize running the Leadville course. I've run the course before, so I'm pretty familiar with it, and I will visualize myself overcoming adversity during the race. And that has been, those really specific visualizations have helped me connect the daily of what I'm doing in training now to a race that I'm excited about down the road. And it really feels like it energizes the in and out of my daily training to connect it to that larger purpose. And I've always find, like, even though I don't need a race on my schedule to feel really motivated to train, having a goal that I feel really energized by does animate what I'm doing. It makes it a little bit easier to commit to the strength training that I need to do. Whenever I'm doing my mountain legs or my lunges and my PT, physically, like, really visualizing myself running Leadville strong helps me connect it to that purpose. And that's a tool that I would recommend for all athletes. Similarly, I'm not just going from 0 to running 100-mile race. I'm doing the Leadville 50 to get ready. I hope to maybe find a 50K to put on the schedule before then, because it's, even going from not racing to doing a 50 is a big jump for me.
Yeah.
But I think I'm racing less this year so that I can focus a little bit more on being present in my life, mental health, physical health. I think I overdid the racing a little bit last year, so I'm pulling back. I'm learning, which is important. I'm learning the lessons of last year, and I'm putting that into practice this year.
I like that. It's awesome to see you not over racing.
Yeah.
I mean,
I do love racing. And like, I wanted to, like, that was a goal for mine last year. I wasn't like, I know this is going to work and I'm committing to it. I went in with curiosity, and the goal being to learn and to put whatever lessons I learned into practice. So that's what I'm doing. So, like, no regrets about what I did last year. I met my goal of, like, how much can I race? I learned, I found that line, so this year I'm adjusting and I'm implementing what I learned. So it really makes everything I experienced last year, puts all of that into perspective. But I'm really focusing on health, building base, building speed, and just not stressing about the details.
What does that mean exactly?
Not stressing about the details?
Yeah.
I've been trying to get on trail as much as possible, but primarily for joy, and not worried about, like, oh my gosh, I got to get so much vert per week and so much whatever per week. I'm making sure that I'm meeting my protein needs, but I'm not overemphasizing any one part of training. When I was training for Western States a couple of years ago, I was really, really intentional and held pretty tightly to heat training, to the nutrition, to the strength training. And right now I'm doing what feels good to me. And lo and behold, what does feel good to me is honestly what I believe will support my long-term success, which is still a lot of consistency. But if I miss a day of strength training, if I miss a double, I'm not being hard on myself, because I know right now the best thing for me is, like, the long-term trajectory, not like, oh, well, I did 2 less miles this week than I was assigned, letting that go.
Yeah, man, I think that that's such a important thing for athletes to think about. Just trying not to over obsess about the volume being off by a few minutes is what was prescribed, or by a few miles, and just being more aware of how you're feeling in your body, how you're responding to the training, instead of just trying to chase those numbers and get them to add up, like, perfectly week by week, because the body has no idea what those numbers are at all.
But I'll also say, even though Leadville isn't until August, I've been putting in steady and consistent 70 to 80 mile weeks every single week all winter, with a few down weeks built in. And I would just really urge anyone who's doing that race or another race, like, get on, like, the best day to start training is yesterday. Get on board now. It's not too late, but if you keep waiting, it will be too late. And I'm really proud of myself for holding a really high baseline of consistency all winter long, even though I didn't have specific events to train for. Like, the whole time I trusted the process. Even if I didn't have a race that I was officially signed up for, in my head, I am always training for that next breakthrough, that next big day. Like, in my head, I'm already training for Western States. I don't even have a ticket in the lottery right now, but I'm training for it.
Right. I like that mentality, that way of thinking, like, that's the same thing that's kind of gone through my mind. Getting, ideally getting into Western States by sometime next month.
And that doesn't mean I'm, like, peaking all the time. I'm not doing 100-mile weeks. I'm not doing 50K long runs. But I keep my baseline high enough that when I feel connected to and motivated by a goal, I'm ready to pursue it. And I don't need to, like, build up from 0 to nothing. We used to joke back in the day, one of our sort of, before we had really nailed our branding and athlete sort of, like, where we get clients from at Microcosm, one of the most popular trajectories was the couch to Leadville plan.
Right. I was just thinking about that because you had mentioned, the people who sign up for Leadville and then push it off a week and then push it off a week and then start panic training.
And then in July, we get a bunch of emails that are like, oh my God, I'm running Leadville in 6 weeks. Can you help me? And the answer is there's just not that much you can do in 6 weeks. There's nothing you can really do. Like 6 years, great. A year, great.
I would say if you're 16 weeks out from 100 and you haven't started training yet, don't do the 100.
Yeah.
That's my hot take for the day.
Yeah, I would agree. I back up with that take.
You're just not going to be able to do it.
And sure, you might be able to finish, but I would always, our thing is, everyone here is capable of finishing. I want people to add on that next layer of curiosity of how strong can I finish?
And finishing, in a way that doesn't set you up for
burnout, and that you don't hate running when
injury,
you're done.
Hating running. We want to set athletes up in a way that helps them get to that finish line. And then they're like, hell yeah, I can't wait for what's next. Not struggling to, get through the mental crises that happens after when you get an injury because you ask too much of your body and then you can't exercise.
Exactly. And a big part of that sustainable growth is kind of what we want to talk about in the meat of our podcast this week, is that it's officially spring. The flowers are starting to bloom here where we live in the mountains. There's still a lot of snow up high, so true mountain running season's a little way off. But big summer races and adventures are looming, and I wanted to get your perspective on how you help athletes train for big summer adventures. So maybe it's a 100-mile race, maybe it's just wanting to spend long days in the mountains with friends, going to group runs, feeling confident when you're adventuring on your own 2 feet. And I think a big sort of question mark for a lot of athletes is how and when do I start to incorporate Vert into my training?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's always the fundamentals that we kind of were just discussing there around consistency, recovering well, maintaining overall health, well-being, including mental health.
Right.
The two things, physical and mental, are together. That is what overall health is. And just putting that to aside, let's assume everybody understands that,
everyone who's made it 40 minutes into the podcast has extremely good mental health, excellent physical health. They're having a 100-gram of protein shake right now.
They're sleeping 8 hours. I've started to incorporate what I call spring training.
Okay.
For my athletes. So in general, at about this time of the season with the majority of athletes I coach, we've already kind of gone through a phase of training where we work on speed, we push the ceiling up, then we work on threshold while also building some base. So we kind of have already this strong foundation in the aerobic system, and we've really started to see some fitness gains. And so in spring training, I like to incorporate, it's kind of like going back a little bit to some of that speed work, making sure that the engine stays, it's revving at like a really high rate. We're doing 10K work again, but we're kind of starting to implement some more combo workouts where we'll do some speed and then maybe we'll do some steep hills after. We're starting to build, we're starting to get used to running uphill more in those workouts. We're starting to get used to running uphill with tired legs. So there's a durability component to this and aerobic.
So you start to sort of microdose Vert in the context of athletes' workouts so that it's not like they just don't go from doing like 12 by 1 minute fast, 1 minute easy into like immediately doing mountain weekends.
That's right. And I like to, again, like running uphill is so neuromuscular where athletes struggle and they think, oh, it's a lack of fitness, but really it's a lack of practice because in winter, there's not usually a lot of hills available. And so athletes are used to running fast and on the flats. And although like that is the foundation for running well uphill, there is still a bit of a lag time between when you start consistently running uphill and when like you start to actually feel kind of tuned in for it. So I like to help athletes along with some focused workouts that help with that while also kind of keeping the ceiling high, especially for athletes whose races are a little bit later on in the summer. There's no it's very beneficial to kind of continue to oscillate in that high end, top end work to make sure that speed and economy is always as good as it can be. Because as soon as we start doing longer trail runs and then we start adding hiking and things like that, athletes really tend to slow down. So you want to keep speed in those systems like really, really dialed as much as you possibly can. I think the other thing is that gradual increase in vert week to week.
So what does that look like?
Well, it's hard to put specific numbers on it because like every athlete is going to be different.
Without using specific numbers, what are sort of frameworks that athletes can use to gauge like what's a good amount to increase week over week?
I would, stick to that 10 to 20% rule. Depending, and I would try not to put it all like in your long run.
Yeah.
Maybe spread it out a little bit. Starting with some more gradual terrain, like as stuff opens up in your area, and then getting steeper and adding hiking kind of like as the spring progresses. So it's really a matter of making sure that you take care of yourself in these moments. Another thing that I like to do with athletes who are, more intermediate and advanced is I add in some very specific guidelines to long runs now. So like in winter when we're building base, long runs are very, very easy. Sometimes there might be some tempo work in there for better athletes who are more experienced, but in general, these runs are very easy. So come spring, in spring training, I often start to add in easy, moderate pushes on hills only. So like if an athlete is running a trail that has some hills, I'll have them run all of those hills easy, moderate. So upper zone 2 to low zone 3, 2 sentences conversational, and then recovery on the downhill on the backside to really help start to bridge that gap between the flat running and running uphill. And because it is so neuromuscular, like it's normal to be exerting yourself on these hills. So I want to help athletes normalize that, and then also start to again bridge that gap. So we focus a lot on that in our training too.
Yeah, I love that. So, another thing that athletes are thinking about is incorporating power hiking. This is something that if you're doing a race that's going to involve power hiking, you definitely want to practice before race day. However, we never want to overemphasize power hiking because if that's all you do, you are going to get slower. You're not going to be building that speed and neuromuscular economy that we really want people to do to reach their athletic potential. So I tend to push my athletes to primarily think about power hiking during the weekend. So in the context of your long run, and maybe even the day after your long run, I usually don't want to push my athletes to focus on power hiking during the week. If power hiking occurs, like especially the day after your workout, if you're running trail, it's best to look for kind of a smooth trail that's dynamic, but isn't so steep that you need to power hike the day after your workout. Because likely if it's steep enough that you need to power hike, you're going to be getting a lot of muscular breakdown on the descents, and you're just not building speed and recovering in the way that you probably should be. So I personally tend to avoid power hiking during the week. Maybe I'll do a couple steps of it, if I'm feeling tired and I need to modulate my effort. There's a trail in our valley called Shitty Steep that for me does require just a little bit of power hiking, but I never want to focus on that during the weeks. I'm always trying to build overall fitness, which will help my power hiking.
Well, I would piggyback off that and to say, if you're working in that vert on your long run a little bit, 10% per week, just slowly adding that up. And I would consider, only small gains each week, kind of like 10% at a time, because we see like a lot of lower leg issues with athletes, maybe who aren't doing like eccentric heel drops or enough strength during the winter that they start to get some strain in the lower legs when they begin running uphill again for the first time. So, take it easy, ease into it. That's going to help prevent some of those issues. But if you're going to run a bit steeper on your long run, then I always like to run that second run on the weekend on more runnable, flatter trails to help re-emphasize some of those other adaptations around speed and economy, and that helps to prevent the slowdown. Like I don't have athletes most of the year do a lot of like heavy back-to-back steep runs until very specific race day training comes around.
Right. And that goes back to the principle. We want to train the most specific things closer to the race and the least specific things further away. So that's why we don't practice. Like if you're like, let's say for me running Leadville, there'll be some power hiking involved. I'm not even starting to think about practicing that intentionally. I kept sometimes like when I'm training for a steeper race, like when I trained for Western States, I incorporated some tread hills. So while I don't power hike my tread hills, it is an opportunity to really intentionally practice that uphill movement. So something that I'll have athletes do, more advanced athletes, incorporate 30-minute tread hills the day of their workout. So rather than going out and doing an easy double, have them do 30 minutes, just get on the treadmill, bump it up to at least 15% or 10-15% grade, whatever is maybe the most appropriate for their level, and then run uphill. So you can rack up 3,000 feet of gain in a really low stakes way because you don't have to run the downhill.
Right. Totally. And I think that brings up another good point is preparing the quads for all the descending that happens when you start to add in the vert. What do you usually do with your athletes there?
Yeah. So, I have them really, again, this is one of the reasons we don't want to just go like balls to the wall when the mountains melt out and immediately go from like running around downtown Denver to doing like 5K of gain in a weekend, because that will explode your quads. And typically, if you do a run that makes you so sore that you need to miss 1 or 2 days of training, that means we likely did way too much. We need to just dial it back. So being sensible about your route planning and making sure that you're taking recovery really, really seriously. So making sure that you are getting that mega dose of protein, again, like 1 gram per pound of body weight. That's a lot of protein. And it's so, so important, especially after these long runs when you get all that eccentric muscular breakdown from the descents. And sometimes this is something that like we just have to learn from our mistakes. But if you do a long run and you're so sore that you can't run or you can't complete your runs in a quality way for 1 to 2 days, that's probably too much. We need to dial it back. Doesn't mean it won't never happen, but it does mean we just need to be really, really intentional and learn. I also think that incorporating strength training year round just a bit through mountain legs, I really like Bulgarian split squats are a great way to start building that. Backwards reverse lunges with a weight, a really great way to start working on that eccentric breakdown as well. However, when you're running on technical trails, because you're braking and because there's a lot more off camber movement, it is going to be normal, even if you've been doing strength training, to be a little bit more sore because of the impact that your quads are absorbing. But I would say if you're getting persistently sore after your weekend trail runs, that's probably a sign it might be good to rein it in just a little bit and maybe bulk up what you're doing in your strength and bulk up that protein consumption to make sure that what you're doing day in, day out in your training supports your weekend adventures.
Yeah. I don't know if I totally 100% agree with the strength training approach to this, but I see the method to the madness there. I think it really probably depends on the athlete.
Individual. Yeah.
But I think and you would agree with this, obviously, there's no substitute for just running those downhills with purpose.
Correct. Yeah. If you are, running a big, a trail race and you're not trying to be intentional at your downhill training, there's no amount of strength training that will make up for that. But strength training can be beneficial in helping get you there. It's a tool. It's not the entire toolbox.
Right. And again,
it doesn't simulate, like occasionally we'll have athletes like training for mountain races while living in the city and we'll have them like run stairs and bleachers. That's a tool, but it is not the same as actually doing the training on trails.
Right. And I think this time of year, if you go into a run that's a little steeper than you're used to, be prepared to have quite a bit of soreness. That's going to be really normal, and that should subside over a few sessions. I like to always encourage athletes when they're starting to get back out on the trails is to run the downhills with purpose if they don't have any niggles.
Yeah.
Because there is basically zero aerobic benefit to running downhill. Gravity takes you and it's hard to get going fast enough that there's any kind of strain to the aerobic system. So what you can do there is to really make those downhills worth it. You can pound your legs a little bit, and that helps to create the eccentric loading that you need to strengthen up and bulletproof those quads. So that way, when it is like time to really do that big mountain adventure, you've got a solid baseline there.
So often I'll have athletes ask, how do I get better at downhill running? And the only way to really do it is to run downhill. Sure, doing a little bit of core stability is going to help. Maybe even doing some agility training. Like I have a ladder that I can practice quick feet on. The best way to get better at downhill running is when you're running downhill to start to push that envelope, to be intentional and to get a little bit outside of your comfort zone. There's no substitute for actually doing the thing.
Yeah. Man, I feel like that just about covers
Yeah,
it.
I think so. I'm really excited to get back in the studio and start recording some more regular podcasts. Next week, I think we have some exciting topics to talk about, and I'll look forward to recapping Lake Sonoma with you, talking about what you learned and what athletes can do about that and implement it in their training.
Yeah, heck yeah. And if you've got any questions for a future call, if you're looking for support in your running journey, we've got a coach for you. Reach out. Microcosm-coaching.com, microcosmcoaching@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody.